As I stand before you today, I am reminded of a powerful truth that has been a cornerstone in my life. God knows what's best for you. Trust Him. So I've had to lean on this truth through seasons of uncertainty, times when I couldn't see the path ahead, and moments when I couldn't see the path ahead, and moments when I wanted to take matters into my own hands. Maybe you've been there too. When life feels out of control, when the future seems unclear, and when it feels like you're standing in a fog, unable to find the way forward. I remember a time in my own life when I was facing a major decision. I had prayed earnestly, asking God for direction, but the answers weren't coming. I could feel the pressure mounting, and I thought, if only I had a clear sign, if only God would show me the way right now, everything would be easier. But instead of the immediate clarity I hoped for, I was met with silence. The waiting was unbearable. It was in that silence that I learned something incredibly important about trusting God. He knows what's best for me, even when I can't see it. It was during that time that I realized how often I try to control my own future, thinking that I know what's best. I had my plans, my ideas about what my life should look like, and I thought I knew how to get there. But God, in His infinite wisdom, was teaching me a valuable lesson, that my understanding is limited and His understanding is perfect. Proverbs 3:5-6 became my anchor in that season. It says, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways admit to Him, and He will make your path straight. Was I had to take a step back and surrender my desire for control, to stop relying on my own understanding and to trust that God, who knows me better than I know myself, was leading me in the right direction. It wasn't easy. There were times when I felt anxious, when I wanted to take control and push forward with my own plans. But through it all, I began to understand that God's ways are always better than mine. His timing is always perfect. I didn't need to have everything figured out right away. I just needed to trust Him to guide me step by step. You see, God's wisdom is so much higher than ours. We live in a world that values quick fixes, immediate results, and the ability to control every detail of our lives. But God operates on a different level. His perspective is eternal. He sees the beginning, the middle, and the end of everything. And He knows what is best for you in every season of your life, even when it doesn't make sense to you at the moment. Think about the story of Joseph in the Old Testament. Here was a young man who was given a dream by God, a dream that one day his family would bow down to him. But instead of stepping into that dream right away, Joseph's life took a series of painful and confusing turns. He was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused of a crime he didn't commit, and thrown into prison. Can you imagine how Joseph must have felt during those years of hardship? He had been given a promise from God, but nothing seemed to be going the way he thought it would. Yet, looking back, Joseph saw that God was orchestrating every event, every delay, and every hardship for a purpose. It wasn't until much later, when he was second in command in Egypt, that he could see how all of those years of waiting had prepared him for the role God had destined for him. In Genesis 50:20, Joseph tells his brothers, you intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. The saving of many lives, Joseph learned that God's wisdom is always perfect, even when we don't understand it. God knew what was best for Joseph, even when Joseph couldn't see it. And in the same way, God knows what's best for you. His plan is unfolding even when it doesn't look the way you expected. His wisdom is at work, guiding you in ways you may not recognize in the moment, but that will become clear in time. Now, I want you to understand something very important. Trusting God with your future doesn't mean that everything will always be easy. It doesn't mean that you will have a life free of struggle or hardship. Far from it. But what it does mean is that you can rest in the assurance that God's wisdom is guiding you. Even in the difficulties, even in the waiting, you can trust that He is working all things for your good. I think of the times in my life when I didn't understand why I had to face certain struggles. When things didn't go the way I had planned, when doors closed, when dreams were delayed, I couldn't see how any of it was working for my good. But I now see, looking back, how God was using those very struggles to shape me, to refine me, and to prepare me for the future He had in mind. Those difficult seasons were not wasted. They were part of God's perfect plan, and He used them to prepare me for what was to come. And that's what God does in your life too. Even in the challenges, He is using them to shape you, to strengthen your faith, and to guide you toward His best for you. When you trust that God knows what's best, you can have peace, even in the midst of uncertainty. You can rest in the confidence that He is in control and that His plan for your life is good, even when it doesn't look like it right now. So today, I want to ask you to take a step of faith. Maybe you've been struggling with trusting God with your future, and you've been trying to control things on your own. Maybe you've been impatient, wondering why God's plans are taking so long to unfold. I encourage you today to trust Him. He sees the bigger picture, and He knows what's best for you. His wisdom is infinite, and His love for you is unshakable. So today, I invite you to let go of your own understanding and trust that God is guiding you with perfect wisdom. Trust that He has your future in His hands, and that He is leading you to a place of hope and peace, even when you can't see the way ahead. As we move forward today in our reflection on it, God knows what's best for you. Trust Him. Let me share with you something that has profoundly shaped my own understanding of trusting God, especially in the times of uncertainty that inevitably come in our lives. You see, there are moments when life throws us into situations where we feel completely out of control, where everything we once thought we knew about our future becomes clouded by questions and doubts. And it's in these moments that we are truly tested, not on our knowledge or ability to control things, but on our ability to trust. I remember a specific time in my life when I faced a significant crossroads. I had been praying earnestly, asking God for guidance, hoping for clear answers. The decisions before me seemed monumental, and my heart longed for the reassurance that I was heading in the right direction. But as the days passed, the answers didn't come. The road ahead was shrouded in fog. I didn't know which way to go, and the uncertainty began to wear on me. I asked myself, why isn't God answering me? Doesn't He see how hard I'm trying to follow His will? It was in that very moment of frustration that God impressed something on my heart that I'll never forget. He whispered to my soul that the timing wasn't mine, it was His. And in His perfect timing, the answers would come. But more importantly, He was asking me to trust not just in the answers, but in His wisdom. And that's the key, isn't it? It's one thing to believe that God has the power to direct our future, but it's quite another to trust that His wisdom is far greater than our own, and that His plan for us is always for our good. I had spent so much time praying for specific outcomes, for the answers I thought I needed, that I had forgotten to simply trust in the process that God was guiding me through. I wasn't just waiting for answers. I was being shaped, refined, and prepared by God for what He had planned ahead. I had to learn to trust in God's wisdom, not just in the answers, but in the journey itself. As I continued to wrestle with the uncertainty of that season, I was reminded of the story of Abraham. God had called him to leave his homeland, to step into the unknown, and to trust that God would lead him to a promised land. But imagine the fear, the doubt, and the uncertainty Abraham must have felt as he set out on a journey without knowing exactly where he was going. In Genesis 12:1, God simply told Abraham, "Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you." God didn't give Abraham a map or a timeline. He didn't tell him how long the journey would take or what hardships he would face along the way. He simply asked Abraham to trust him, to take that first step, and to follow his lead. And what stands out to me is that Abraham obeyed. He didn't have all the answers, but he trusted in God's wisdom and followed God's call. And as we look at the story of Abraham, we see how God led him step by step, how He provided for him, and how He fulfilled His promises to Abraham, even when Abraham couldn't see the path ahead. I think about this in my own life. How many times have I been faced with uncertainty, wondering if I'm making the right decisions, wondering if I'm following the right path? And in those moments, I have to remind myself that God is not just concerned with the destination. He is concerned with the journey. His wisdom isn't limited to the moment of decision, but it encompasses the entire process of growing, learning, and trusting. When I look back, I see that it wasn't the specific outcomes I was hoping for that brought me peace. It was the trust in His guidance that gave me the assurance I needed to move forward. Even when I couldn't see the way ahead, I could trust that God's wisdom was leading me exactly where I needed to go. And as I've learned to trust in God's wisdom, I've realized something else. Trusting in God's wisdom doesn't mean we won't face challenges. In fact, some of the greatest moments of growth and transformation happen when we are facing the most difficult challenges. It's during those times that God is refining our faith, stretching us beyond our comfort zones, and preparing us for what lies ahead. I think about the life of Job, a man who faced unimaginable suffering. He lost everything: his wealth, his health, his family. And through it all, Job wrestled with understanding why God allowed such pain. Yet, even in his suffering, Job came to the profound realization that God's wisdom was beyond his comprehension. In Job 42:2-3, Job declares, "I know that you can do all things. No purpose of yours can be thwarted." You ask, who is this that obscures my plans without knowledge? Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. Things too wonderful for me to know. Job didn't have all the... He didn't understand why he was suffering, but he came to trust that God's wisdom and purpose were far greater than his own understanding. And in the end, God restored what was lost and blessed Job abundantly. This is a powerful reminder that even in our struggles, we can trust in God's wisdom, knowing that He is at work, even when we don't see it. So, what about you today? Are you in a season of uncertainty, wondering how God is working in your life? Maybe you're facing decisions that seem impossible, or you're in the midst of a trial that feels like it will never end. I want to encourage you today. Trust Him. Trust that He knows what's best for you even when you can't see it. Trust that His wisdom is far greater than your understanding, and that He is using every moment, every trial, every joy, and every challenge to shape you into the person He has called you to be. God is not only in control of the outcome of your life, He is also in control of the process. And the process, as hard as it may seem, is just as important as the destination. When you trust in God's wisdom, you can rest assured that you are exactly where you need to be. So today, take that step of faith, knowing that the God who sees the end from the beginning is leading you in the way that is best for you. Trust Him, and you will find peace in the knowledge that He is guiding you toward a future filled with hope and purpose. As we continue to reflect on the truth that God knows what's best for you, trust Him. I want to delve deeper into something that has been both a challenge and a profound source of peace in my life: the importance of trusting God's timing. If there's one thing I've learned, it's that God's timing often doesn't match my own, but it is always perfect. I think about the countless times I've found myself in situations where I've asked God, why the delay? Why isn't this happening now? I've prayed, I've planned, I've worked hard. Why hasn't the door opened yet? Perhaps you've been there too. You've done everything right. You've prayed with all your heart, and yet the answers seem slow to come. In fact, it sometimes feels like we're just standing still, waiting for God to move, and we can't see any sign of progress. That's exactly what happened to me in a particular season of my life. I had been praying for a breakthrough. I knew God had placed a vision in my heart, and I believed with all my being that He was leading me into something great. But as the months stretched into years, the breakthrough seemed no closer. It was in those moments of waiting that I found myself frustrated, disheartened, and questioning God's timing. I wondered, why the delay? Why haven't I seen the fruit of my labor? I'm sure many of you can relate to that feeling of wondering if God is really listening, or if He has forgotten the prayers you've been offering up day after day. But as I struggled with impatience, I began to sense God gently speaking to my heart. He wasn't saying anything dramatic, but He was whispering the truth that has since become so precious to me. Just in that moment, I realized that my frustration wasn't because God wasn't listening. My frustration came from the fact that I had my own timeline, my own plan, my own idea of how things should unfold. But God's plan was bigger, and His timing was perfect. It was in the waiting that God was doing a deeper work in me. As I look back now, I can see that if God had answered my prayers in the way I expected, if He had opened the door when I wanted, I wouldn't have been ready for what He had prepared. The waiting, the delays, the unanswered prayers were not signs of His absence. They were part of His process to shape me, refine me, and prepare me for what He had ahead. Think about the story of David. God had anointed him to be king, yet David's path to the throne wasn't a straight line. It was full of trials, obstacles, and years of waiting. God promised David the throne, but it wasn't until years later that David was crowned king. Can you imagine what David must have felt as he spent years fleeing for his life, hiding in caves and facing unimaginable challenges? There were moments when he must have wondered, God, the delay, why do I have to suffer so much? Didn't you promise me a kingdom? But in the end, David realized that God's timing was perfect. If David had become king too early, before he had been through the trials, he wouldn't have been prepared to lead the way God intended. The years of waiting, the years of hardship, the years of being refined in the wilderness were all part of God's perfect timing. David's waiting was not in vain. God was using it to shape him into the man he needed to be to lead God's people. The same is true for us. We may not understand why we have to wait, why things don't happen when we think they should. But I can tell you from my own experience that God's timing is always perfect. It's not about our schedule. It's about His. And while we may not see it in the moment, we can trust that God is working even when we don't feel it. I remember another time when I was faced with a situation that seemed like a dead end. Doors that I thought would open just didn't. Opportunities I had been praying for seemed to slip away, and I found myself once again questioning why things weren't moving forward. I knew I was following God's will, yet I couldn't see any sign of progress. And it was in the midst of that frustration that God gave me a simple yet powerful reminder. His timing was not my timing, but it was the best timing. I had to surrender my desire to control the outcome and trust that God knew when the right moment would come. Looking back on that season, I can see how God used that time to grow my faith. I had to learn to trust Him, not only with my desires, but with my future. The waiting wasn't wasted. It was in those quiet moments that God was teaching me to lean on Him more deeply, to trust in His sovereignty, and to rest in the assurance that His timing was best. And when the time was right, when God's perfect timing aligned with His will for my life, I saw how everything fell into place. It wasn't just a matter of receiving what I had prayed for. It was about receiving it at the perfect time, when I was fully prepared, when the circumstances were perfectly aligned, and when I was able to fully embrace the blessing God had for me. I think about how often we try to rush God's timing. We live in a world that demands instant results, immediate gratification, and quick fixes. But God's work in our lives is not like that. He doesn't rush. He is the creator of all things, and He knows that the process is just as important as the destination. God is not simply focused on getting us to the end goal. He is focused on who we become in the process. The waiting isn't wasted. The delays aren't denials. They are a part of God's perfect plan to shape us, mold us, and make us into the people He created us to be. As we face seasons of waiting, let us remember that God is never late. He is always right on time. It's in those moments of waiting that we learn to trust in His perfect timing and His plan for our lives. It's in the waiting that we are shaped, refined, and prepared for the blessings He is preparing for us. I want to encourage you today, if you are in a season of waiting, if you are struggling with the uncertainty of when or how things will unfold, trust that God knows what is best for you. Trust that His timing is always perfect. He is working behind the scenes, and when the time is right, He will open the door for you. Keep trusting, keep waiting, and know that, just as He did for David, for me, and for countless others, God's perfect timing will unfold in your life at just the right moment. Trust His plan, trust His timing, and trust that He is working all things for your good. As we continue our journey through the message, well, God knows what's best for you. Trust Him. I want to speak to you today about the incredible peace that comes from trusting God's plan, especially when things don't make sense in the moment. I've learned through my own experiences that trusting God doesn't just mean acknowledging His sovereignty over my life. It means having the peace to rest in His perfect plan, even when the future feels uncertain and we're tempted to take matters into our own hands. I remember a particular time in my life when I was grappling with a decision that seemed too big to make. The situation was complicated. There were many factors involved, and each one of them seemed to pull me in a different direction. I prayed earnestly, seeking God's wisdom and clarity. I knew in my heart that God had a plan for me, but I couldn't see how it was all going to come together. I was overwhelmed by the uncertainty of the situation, and my own thoughts and feelings made it even harder to discern what I should do. For days, I wrestled with doubt and anxiety, asking myself, or how will this all work out? What if I make the wrong decision? What if things don't go according to plan? It was in the midst of that struggle that God led me to the words of Isaiah 26:3. You will keep in perfect peace those whose minds are steadfast because they trust in you. In that moment, God spoke deeply to my heart, reminding me that peace doesn't come from having all the answers. It doesn't come from knowing exactly how things will unfold. True peace comes from trusting God, knowing that He is in control and that His in control and that His plan is far better than anything I could come up with on my own. I realized then that my anxiety was rooted in a lack of trust. I was looking at the situation through my own limited perspective, and I wasn't fully resting in the truth that God already had the solution. God knew exactly what I needed. He knew the right timing. He knew the right path. And in that moment, I had to choose to surrender my fears, my doubts, and my need for control, and rest in the peace that comes from trusting God's wisdom. As I reflect on that time, I see how God's peace filled me during that period of uncertainty. When I let go of my anxiety and trusted that God was guiding me, I experienced a peace that was beyond anything I had known before. The kind of peace that transcends understanding. And I want you to understand that this peace is available to you as well. No matter where you find yourself today, no matter what you are facing, God promises to give you peace when you trust in His plan. In John 14:27, Jesus says, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not be afraid." The peace that Jesus offers is not the peace that Jesus offers, is not the peace that comes from circumstances aligning perfectly with our desires. No, it's a peace that comes from knowing that God's hand is at work in our lives, even when things seem out of control. It's a peace that comes from resting in the assurance that God knows what is best for us, even when we can't see it. I have experienced this peace in many areas of my life, and I know that many of you have as well. There have been times when I faced uncertainty about my career, my relationships, and even my health. At times, I felt like I was walking in darkness, unsure of what to do or which direction to take. But in those moments, I have chosen to trust God, to lean into His promises, and to surrender my anxiety to Him. And time again, I have experienced His peace in the midst of the storm. I think about how God worked in my life during one of the most challenging seasons I faced. I was facing a major transition, and everything in my life seemed to be changing all at once. The uncertainty was overwhelming, but God led me to a quiet place of prayer and reflection, where He reminded me that His plan was already in motion, even if I couldn't see it. He reminded me that His timing was perfect and that He was leading me towards something greater than I could imagine. As I surrendered to His will, I felt His peace wash over me. and I began to trust Him with every aspect of my life. That peace gave me the strength I needed to move forward even when I couldn't see the road ahead. And this is exactly what God wants for you. No matter what uncertainty you may be facing, He wants to give you peace. He wants to fill your heart with the assurance that He is in control, that He is leading you, and that He has a good plan for your life. There is a peace that comes from knowing that God has your future in His hands, and that peace can carry you through the darkest of times. But this peace only comes when we trust God fully. It's easy to trust God when everything is going smoothly, but the true test of trust comes in the midst of uncertainty and challenges. I've learned that trusting God means letting go of my need to understand everything and simply resting in the fact that He knows what is best for me. It means choosing to believe that His plans for me are good, even when I can't see how everything is going to work out. I think of the Apostle Paul, who faced countless trials in his life and ministry. He was imprisoned, beaten, shipwrecked, and faced more hardship than most of us could ever imagine. But despite all of this, Paul never lost his peace. In Philippians 4:6-7, he writes, "Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus." Paul knew that. Peace doesn't come from our circumstances. It comes from the presence of God in our lives. It comes from knowing that we are held in His loving hands and that He is working all things for our good. Even when life was difficult, Paul's heart was anchored in the peace of God. And this peace is available to each of us today. So I want to encourage you, whatever you're facing, to trust God with your future. Surrender your fears, your doubts, and your anxieties to Him. Let go of the need to control your circumstances and allow Him to fill you with the peace that surpasses understanding. Trust that He is working all things for your good, even when you can't see it. And when you do, you will experience the same peace that has carried me through the challenges of life. God's peace is not just a feeling. It's a deep, unshakable confidence that He is in control and that He is leading you to a future filled with hope. Trust Him and experience the peace that only He can provide. As we conclude today's message, I want to leave you with a call to action that I believe can truly transform the way you approach every aspect of your life. When we embrace the truth that knows what's best for you, trust Him, we are stepping into a life of profound peace and confidence. We are choosing to trust not just in God's promises, but in His process. As I've shared throughout this message, the journey of trusting God with our future, especially when we can't see the way ahead, is not always easy. It's often a path marked by uncertainty, challenges, and waiting. But it's also a path that leads to a deeper relationship with God, a closer walk with Him, and a life that is filled with peace that surpasses understanding. I've lived through seasons where it felt like I was standing still, waiting for something to happen, waiting for God to move, to speak, to reveal what was next. And in those moments, I struggled with doubt, struggled with impatience, and yes, struggled with trust. It wasn't that I didn't believe in God. I just didn't understand His timing, and I didn't always trust that His plan was unfolding in the way that was best for me. But the turning point came when I realized that true faith doesn't depend on having all the answers. True faith is believing that God knows what is best for us, even when we can't see it. Even when we can't see it, even when we feel stuck, true faith is choosing to trust Him with our future. to believe that His wisdom and timing are always perfect, and to surrender our desires, our fears, and our anxieties to Him. I can tell you from my own life that there is nothing more liberating than fully trusting God with your future. It doesn't mean that life becomes easy or that every prayer is answered in the way we expect. It doesn't mean that we stop working, making decisions, or pursuing our goals. No, trusting God with our future means recognizing that He is leading us in the right direction, that He has a good and perfect plan for our lives, and that He will provide for us in ways that we could never imagine. There's a peace that comes with that trust, peace that doesn't come from our circumstances, but from knowing that the Creator of the universe holds our future in His hands. I've experienced that peace, and I want you to experience it too. I want you to know deep in your heart that God knows what is best for you. You can rest in that truth. You can walk forward in confidence, knowing that He is guiding you every step of the way. His plans for you are greater than anything you could ever imagine, and He is always working for your good. So today, I want to encourage you to take a step of faith. If you're here today and you're struggling to trust God with your future, I want to invite you to surrender that struggle to Him. If you've been trying to control things, trying to figure it all out on your own, or trying to rush ahead to the next season, I encourage you to pause and trust God's timing. There's no need to have all the answers today. There's no need to know exactly what the future holds. What matters is that you trust God to lead you step by step, day by day. I'm not saying that it will always be easy, but I promise you that it will always be worth it. Trusting God with your future will bring you a peace that the world cannot give. And as you take that step, I believe you will see God's hand at work in ways that will leave you in awe. You will see how He is working all things together for your good, how He is preparing you for something far greater than you could have ever imagined. Maybe today you're in a place where you feel uncertain about your future and you're wondering what's next. Maybe you're facing challenges that you don't know how to overcome, or you've been waiting for something that hasn't come yet. I want to encourage you today, trust God with it all. Whatever it is, your career, your relationships, your health, your dreams, surrender it to Him. Let go of the need to control and trust that He is working behind the scenes, orchestrating everything in His perfect timing. Trust that He has your future in His hands, and He will guide you to the place He has prepared for you. I want to ask you right now to make a decision in your heart. Will you trust God with your future? Will you lay down your anxiety, your plans, and your fears at His feet and trust that He knows what's best for you? This is a daily choice, a decision to believe that God is good, that He is faithful, and that He is always working for your good. When you choose to trust God in this way, you will find that the peace of God fills your heart, and you will have confidence in the journey ahead. So I challenge you today, take that step. Trust God with your future. And as you do, I promise you that you will experience His faithfulness in ways that will fill you with awe, peace, and joy. Your future is secure in His hands. And that is a promise you can hold onto every day of your life. Keep trusting. Keep walking in faith. And remember, God knows what's best for you. Trust Him